What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first ever episode of Oversight, a place where we talk about new technology or concepts that will shape our future. Today, we are going to talk about designer babies, a place where genetic traits are as accessible as makeup. Designer babies? No, we're not talking about simple child models over here. We are talking about genetically enhancing human beings. Discussions around designer babies have varied, from fear about creating a new superhuman race to hope and optimism about curing genetic illnesses. With medical innovation for genetic editing skyrocketing, our medical community has chosen to keep away from editing babies. The one doctor who edited the Chinese twins was imprisoned for illegal medicine practices. And even in the United States in June 2019, the government put a ban on genetically modifying babies and embryos to establish pregnancy. However, dependent on the success of the secret trial in China, could we start to see more designer babies pop up? Or is it a tragedy willing to happen? Well, now we are going to discuss this with a few special guests that we brought in today and see what they have on this perspective of designer babies. Now, welcome to our discussion phase. We have two guests today that have their own unique perspectives on designer baby. Our first guest is Louis Philippe, and our second guest is Gaia. So let's start with Louis Philippe. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Louis Philippe, and I'm an incoming student at McGill University in mathematics and computer science. And obviously, genetic engineering and designer babies are a topic of interest because they touch on so many ethical aspects and applied ethics. So it's very interesting as a debate for me and for society as well.
For sure. Gaia, could you please give yourself an introduction?
By all means. So, good day. Obviously, my name's Gaia Noseworthy. I'm a third-year student of mathematical physics at UNB with a few added focuses towards kind of computer science, statistics, and biology. My goals in the future are to study genetic engineering as my research profession. And thus, I've done a decent amount of reading into the area, but definitely nowhere near enough as it stands.
Nice. All right. Here, we will get right into the topics. The first question I'm going to ask you guys is, how do you guys think designer babies will affect the future we live in?
So, of course, on this one, it's clear to see all the good potential of this technology. You know, you can cure any disease you want before someone is even born, but also it's a very slippery slope. Whereas someone could try to get more power, a country could secretly develop a human weapon. Or as we've seen in the novel Brave New World, we're just kind of stratified society, and everyone is happy with their position in society, whether to the top of the hierarchy or to the bottom. And it's a very dystopic view of what could become society if we let genetic engineering or designer babies go maybe too far, uncontrolled. So of course, there's an aspect that can be very positive, but it can also be very negative. And I'm eager to hear Gaia on what may be those positive or negative, especially aspects, because that's what's maybe most interesting to forecast about the future, see what could happen if this goes bad.
Yeah, so I have a few particular concerns about genetic engineering that I'm not really sure the validity of. So obviously, it's definitely been established either in previous talks or just naturally that for talking about the genome, we know the genome defines how humans are built, and then after humans are built, they're more defined by how they're nurtured in life. So you create a baseline and you can modify that over time without genetic engineering already. So for me, I don't see genetic engineering as a problem for something such as mind control or establishing a dictatorship exactly, but definitely creating a civilization of people that are either way too happy or unfocused on pushing forward or are very complacent would be fully possible, since that's an editable part. For me, I see this more likely as being a good thing overall. In particular, for me, I know many of the nations who are working on genetic engineering right now are quite democratic with a large number of oversight, except for a few choice nations, of course. But we also know that genetic engineering, first and foremost, is a medical technology. The big goal of genetic engineering is prevent cancers. That's the big thing that it's really good at right now. but it's also to prevent many genetic disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Crohn's, and many allergies and other deadly influences. So because it's a medical technology, it's going to be accessible to the poorer individuals in the nation, likely early on, meaning it's more like computers, it's likely never to be too exclusionary after it gets set up. So for me, I think it's primarily in the future going to be a medical technology, personally, and I think its uses are going to I don't want to talk about trickle down because it's never been a good thing, but I think from the onset, due to its medical nature in countries like Canada and in much of the European Union, where healthcare is subsidized extremely for people and they have democratic oversight, we're going to see access to it early on from a multitude of people, and we're going to see a lot more oversight in these countries. So for me, I'm seeing a positive influence of creating humans that are stronger, smarter, faster, whatever, if you want to start singing the Daft Punk song. I think it's Daft Punk at least. But I think we're going to see improvements to humanity. And while we run risks of creating complacent humans, even though the genome defines how we are, I don't think it's good enough to create humans that are quote unquote brainwashed. So I don't see a Brave New World society, but I do see a complacent society as the big risk right now.
So we can go to our next question about are designer babies ethical? And I want to start it off by asking if you guys think that designer babies will cause a more like economic gap between people if it gets commercialized, because then the rich would
keep the mic close to yourself. It's hard to hear you.
Okay. Do you guys think that designer babies would create a bigger economic gap between the rich and the poor, as the rich would be able to like get the more expensive, the more premium genes, whereas the poor would basically be in genetic lottery at that point?
So if we're talking about the ethics of controlled evolution, that actually is a very good question about genetic engineering, and one that's we're still trying to answer is it right to edit people, right? And to me, I think that that's a three-parter question. And the first part is it right to edit people for medical reasons, to prevent cystic fibrosis, to prevent a person from suffering through clinical depression and maybe scoliosis, maybe schizophrenia, psychosis, many other physical and mental ailments. And I think it's very clear that the goal of our medical system is to do no harm or do as little harm as possible. So it's a pretty easy question. Yeah, it is ethical to edit a human being to prevent diseases. That's essentially what we do already. And the only fight back against that is currently the anti-vax movement.
There's a notion of, I find, control in what you bring, in a sense that you can edit an adult for aesthetics, but it's usually the adult himself or herself that decides to go in for aesthetics treatment, whereas a baby, it's definitely imposed upon the baby the aesthetics aspects of that they're going to have later on in life. So I feel for me, there's a clear boundary. And if we come back to what we said before, of the ideal human, well, maybe if we accept that people are edited for aesthetic reasons, well, you're kind of gonna get that narrowing of visual appearances in the population, and who knows, you might be living in a world of someday clones of everyone very, very physically similar. Well, who knows? For us right now, it's bad because personally, I find diversity like incredibly interesting. But some other might have very different views on that. As for what you said on increasing capacities, that I think that it won't be a problem if I can maybe bridge the gap to what we said also on the ethics, and maybe move on that if it's done ethically. Because of course, if it's not democratized and accessible to everyone, you're going to get inequalities rising and rising. But if experts and ethicists from all fields across discuss on the topic and come to clear guidelines as to who, well, at least to make sure that everyone can access it equally. And I guess like pretty much anything, there is going to be an illegal market maybe for for gene editing, so people might profit of that. Again, so I guess we can't avoid that. But if it's done ethically and democratically, it's going to be a benefit for everyone, because society as a whole will have just better people. to fuel, say, the expansion of humans, and also fuel the well-being of you said it, humans, plants, animals living on this planet, and many others maybe.
How do you guys feel about like commercializing like the genetic research for designer babies? Because that would also increase the scientific research, like the motivation to do it if there's money involved. Obvious. How do you guys feel about that?
For inequality and the devil's advocate of commercialization, that's an interesting one for me. Because, for example, gene editing is cheap. CRISPR itself, you could do a full CRISPR experiment on $200. That, like, it is, you can go buy a kit online right now and do a CRISPR experiment on yourself to increase your muscle mass. It's
Really?
that easy, and it's legal. Like, it's like, that's not, there's no laws against that. And I have a friend who was considering doing just that, just to see if he could, right? So it's fully possible to do that. And so there's not even a black market. It's just a legal market at this point. And for increasing inequality, I don't think inequality is going to be a problem. I think it's going to be closer to tattoos because there's so much money to be made by selling this really cheap method for just a 200% markup and making a ton of profits off the general population. So commercialization for this might actually be a good way of preventing the inequality, but also creating an inequality at the same point. But it would create the standard wealth inequality instead of gene inequality, right?
For sure. What do you think?
If it becomes a market, if it becomes a market, you're gonna get top tier products and low tier products. Maybe you can expect from from
but
that.
It's so easy to commercialize it. You could commercialize it like you could phones or tattoos, right? And that more better genes are not going to be extremely inaccessible because, well, they're so cheap to make. You mark this stuff up like insulin, which that's also a controversial topic that many countries mark up insulin by about 7,000%. The United States right now, but it's because it's so cheap to do. It would be very easy to sell it to the standard populace with huge markups and make profits. So it would be a bad idea as a company to limit them like gold watches, like Swiss watches, because they're so cheap to do. If you hit a large audience, everyone's going to want their baby to be perfect. I don't think I've ever met a parent who didn't want their child to be perfect, at least any half decent parent. So and a lot of parents would lap this up, especially during that late pregnancy, early birth phase where they have that extreme emotional connection and desire for pure success for their child.
As we know right now in society, like evolution hasn't been as significant anymore just because of our sheer population. So this might be a way that evolution might continue in the future. Like people talk about how humans are going to evolve. And if you've read the book Homo sapiens and like its sequel Homo Deus, they talk about this, and they also mention technological evolution. So I have a feeling that technological evolution and integration with humans and evolution through genetics and designer babies, there's going to be a time where they clash, and we're gonna see which one's better. So
technological evolution is known as transhumanism, if you ever just want a good word to throw in there for it. And it is a good question of at what point is editing technologically better or worse than editing physically? And I think there's a worry that they'll clash, but I think my biggest thing is I think they can support each other because there are things genetic engineering is bad at or can't do, and those things are exactly what transhumanism can do.
Yeah.
Genetic engineering doesn't exist in absentia. It doesn't exist in a void. It is a piece of a puzzle that's going to be better humans. And in the end, a lot of these questions we do have to answer of the ethics of it. Will we see wealth inequality? Will we see damage done to people? Will we see the militarization or adaptation of this technology for less ethical purposes? And we're going to see it. But the thing about humanity is we have always prevailed in the end, and I don't think that's going to stop now.
I agree.
Yeah, that's I'd say hope for the best, but also expect the worst. In the way
the best mentality to have.
Yeah, because I'm also convinced that there will be some things going sideways, and but it's our ability to recover from that and learn from that as we did in the past that will decide whether or not maybe we're worthy of having such technologies and from using them in the future.
Want to hear the full discussion from today's episode? Links in the description below. What are your thoughts on designer babies? Have a topic suggestion for the next episode? Leave them in the comments below and we'll be sure to read them. Thank you for watching our very first episode of Oversight. We'll hope you check back soon for more technological controversy.